The moment Prince Harry realized his legacy had been sealed behind palace walls without his consent was not loud, not dramatic, and not public. It was silent, cold, and devastating, and according to insiders, it happened at exactly when a confidential legal courier arrived at his Montecito residence carrying what would later be described as the document that erased him while he was still alive. The envelope bore the unmistakable royal seal, the same seal that once opened doors for him across continents, the same seal that once confirmed his place in a 1,000-year-old bloodline, and now that very seal delivered something far more brutal, a permanent declaration that the crown had executed what insiders called a legacy containment protocol, effectively freezing, isolating, and legally restructuring the narrative, identity, and institutional future connected to Prince Harry and his children. Harry reportedly stared at the language for nearly 20 minutes without moving, his hands trembling slightly, his jaw tightening with each clause he read, because buried deep inside the legal terminology was the phrase that changed everything: irreversible sovereign narrative protection. That phrase alone meant the crown had declared itself the ultimate authority over the historical, ceremonial, and institutional identity tied to his lineage, and more importantly, it meant Harry had lost the one thing he had always believed could never be taken from him: his permanent place in royal continuity. What happened next was not publicized, not announced, and not acknowledged by the palace in any official statement, but behind the scenes, something shifted inside Harry that insiders described as a quiet ignition. Because for the first time since the separation protocols were triggered, he was no longer reacting emotionally, he was preparing legally. According to a senior California-based legal strategist who spoke under strict anonymity, Harry had already begun assembling a private litigation team weeks before the document arrived. But this delivery accelerated everything, transforming quiet preparation into what sources now call the most explosive court filing of his life. This was not about money, not about titles, and not about public perception. This was about something far deeper and far more personal. It was about reclaiming narrative sovereignty over his own identity and restoring institutional recognition for his children, who, according to insiders, had become the unintended collateral in a war of legacy control. The palace, however, had anticipated resistance long before Harry even considered fighting back. Internal palace archives confirmed that what they called the Windsor Protection Firewall had already been activated, a digital, legal, and institutional containment structure designed to prevent unauthorized reclamation of royal identity once sovereign containment was executed. This meant Harry was no longer simply fighting a family dispute, he was confronting an institutional machine designed specifically to outlast individuals, override personal claims, and preserve sovereign continuity at all costs. Palace insiders revealed that the firewall protocol had one purpose: to ensure that legacy, once transferred to sovereign custody, could never be privately reclaimed without triggering constitutional review. But Harry was not the same man who had once walked away quietly, not anymore, and insiders say the moment that truly changed him happened late one night inside his Montecito study, when he reportedly opened an old leather-bound photo album filled with images from his childhood, images of himself with Princess Diana, images of himself standing beside his brother, images of himself smiling beneath the weight of a crown he never asked to carry but always believed he belonged to. It was in that moment, staring at those photographs, that insiders say Harry made a decision that would shock both the palace and the legal establishment. He would challenge the crown's permanent legacy decision in court, not publicly, not emotionally, but constitutionally. The preparation for that filing began in absolute secrecy. Multiple sources confirmed that Harry had authorized his legal team to draft what they called a sovereign narrative reclamation petition, a legal instrument rarely used, and almost never against the crown itself. The petition would argue that while sovereign authority governs institutional recognition, it cannot permanently erase or privatize the personal narrative identity of a living royal descendant without due constitutional review, effectively challenging the palace's claim to unilateral narrative control. Legal analysts familiar with the strategy described it as a direct constitutional challenge disguised as a personal legal appeal, a move so bold that even seasoned royal lawyers privately admitted it could trigger a historical legal confrontation unlike anything seen in modern royal history. Meanwhile, inside Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere had shifted from quiet confidence to cautious alertness, because whispers of Harry's preparation had already reached senior advisors, and according to insiders, Prince William himself had been briefed on the possibility that Harry was preparing to file a legal challenge challenge that could force the palace to publicly defend its legacy containment protocols. Sources close to William described his reaction as calm but deeply serious, not angry, not emotional, but fully aware of what this meant, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy itself. Because if Harry succeeded, it would establish a precedent that no sovereign containment decision was truly permanent. What makes this situation even more explosive is the timing, because insiders say Harry's legal team had deliberately waited for a specific moment to act, a moment when institutional vulnerabilities were highest, when internal palace communications revealed increased coordination between legal offices and archival departments, suggesting the Crown was preparing to finalize permanent narrative restrictions tied to Harry's lineage. That preparation signaled urgency, and Harry responded with urgency of his own, accelerating the finalization of his court filing, ensuring it would be submitted before sovereign containment protocols could be permanently sealed beyond challenge. The emotional toll of this preparation has reportedly been immense, because this was not just a legal battle, it was a personal war between identity and institution, between bloodline and bureaucracy, between the man he was born as and the narrative he was being legally redefined into. Insiders described Harry as focused, determined, and uncharacteristically silent, avoiding public appearances, limiting communication, and dedicating nearly all his time to preparing for what could become the defining legal confrontation of his life. And yet, perhaps the most chilling detail of all is what insiders say Harry told one of his closest legal advisors just days before authorizing the final draft of the filing. He did not speak about revenge. He did not speak about anger. He did not speak about the Crown. He spoke about something far simpler and far more devastating. He reportedly said, they can take titles, they can take access, they can take privilege, but they cannot take truth. And truth is what I'm going to court to reclaim. Because this was never just about Harry. This was about whether a man born into legacy could be legally erased from it while he was still alive. And now, for the first time since the Crown declared its decision permanent, Prince Harry was preparing to fight back. Not with interviews, not with memoirs, but with the one weapon the palace could not ignore. The decision had been made, the papers had been drafted, and somewhere between the quiet California nights and the suffocating silence of royal corridors thousands of miles away, Prince Harry had crossed a psychological threshold from wounded son to constitutional challenger, when his lead attorney reportedly slid the final draft across a glass conference table and said just 5 words that froze the air inside the room: "This cannot be undone after submission." Those words carried the weight of centuries, because once Harry authorized that filing, he would no longer be simply estranged from the monarchy. He would become the first modern royal in living memory to directly challenge sovereign legacy authority through legal channels designed to question institutional permanence itself. Harry didn't sign immediately. Sources present in the room said he stared at the final page for nearly 10 full minutes, scanning every line, every argument, every clause designed to dismantle the Crown's claim to permanent narrative control, because he understood the consequences better than anyone. This was not just a legal move, it was a declaration of independence from the system that had defined him since birth. His signature would not just initiate a court process, it would trigger a constitutional confrontation between personal identity and institutional sovereignty, between a father trying to reclaim his children's legacy and an institution determined to preserve its authority at any cost. What made the filing especially explosive was its core argument, a legal theory insiders described as narrative ownership reversal, a claim that while the Crown maintains sovereign authority over institutional continuity, it cannot permanently privatize or suppress the historical identity of a living descendant without violating constitutional principles of personal autonomy. It was a direct challenge to the Crown's firewall itself, a legal strike aimed at dismantling the invisible barriers that had quietly sealed Harry's legacy beyond his reach. The petition reportedly included sealed exhibits, confidential archival references, and private communications that Harry's legal team believed could demonstrate procedural overreach in the execution of sovereign containment protocols. When insiders revealed that Harry's legal strategy included a request for judicial review of the exact moment sovereign containment was authorized, meaning the court would be forced to examine the internal timeline, decision-making process, and legal justification behind the Crown's permanent legacy decision. This was unprecedented because it would bring the monarchy's internal procedures into legal scrutiny, something the institution had successfully avoided for generations. Inside Buckingham Palace, the reaction was swift, silent, and deeply controlled. No public statements were issued, no press briefings were scheduled, but behind closed doors, senior advisors reportedly convened emergency consultations to assess the implications of Harry's filing. The palace understood what this meant. If the court agreed agreed to hear the case, the monarchy could be forced into a public legal defense of decisions it had always executed privately, and that possibility alone represented a risk to institutional authority that could not be ignored. Prince William, according to insiders, was among the first to be informed, and those close to him described his reaction as deeply conflicted, not because he doubted the crown's authority, but because he understood Harry's motivation. This was not a publicity stunt. This was not revenge. This was something far more dangerous. This was conviction. Sources say William reportedly asked a single question during the briefing, a question that revealed the emotional gravity of the situation. Is he prepared for what happens if he loses? Because losing would not simply mean failure, it would mean permanent legal confirmation that the Crown's containment decision was absolute, irreversible, and beyond challenge. Meanwhile, in California, Harry's world had narrowed to a singular focus. He avoided public appearances, declined invitations, and remained largely unseen, spending long hours reviewing legal strategies, consulting with advisors, and preparing himself for the storm he knew was coming. Insiders described him as quieter than ever, but also stronger, as if the act of fighting back had restored something inside him that had been missing for years. When Harry reportedly placed his signature on the last page of the filing, authorizing its submission and officially initiating the legal process that could redefine his relationship with the monarchy forever, witnesses say the room fell completely silent as he set the pen down, because everyone present understood what had just happened. A line had been crossed, one that could never be uncrossed. The filing itself was delivered through sealed legal channels, bypassing public record systems and ensuring maximum confidentiality until formal court acknowledgement. This was deliberate, strategic, and designed to prevent the palace from controlling the narrative before the legal process officially began. Harry's team understood the importance of timing, and they intended to ensure the court heard the case before institutional countermeasures could be fully activated. Back in London, palace insiders described the atmosphere as tense but composed. The monarchy had faced crises before, abdications, scandals, public backlash, but this was different. This was not external criticism. This was internal resistance, and it came from someone who understood the system from the inside out. That made it unpredictable. That made it dangerous. What happens next remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. Prince Harry is no longer waiting for legacy to be restored. He is fighting to reclaim it, not through speeches, not through media, not through public sympathy, but through the one arena where even sovereign authority must answer questions, the court of law. And as the legal machinery begins to move, as sealed filings are processed and institutional responses are quietly prepared, one truth hangs over everything like a gathering storm. This is no longer just a family conflict. This is a battle over identity, over history, over who controls the narrative of a royal life once lived at the center of the world. Because for Prince Harry, this was never about reclaiming privilege. It was about reclaiming himself. It was about reclaiming himself. It was about reclaiming himself. It was about reclaiming